Hey, what up? It's Tampa Brad, back at you with law number 25 of the 48 Laws of Power. Law number 25 is recreate yourself. Law number 25 revolves around is keep the show going. No matter what, keep people engaged with what you're doing, and if you do that, you will inherently gather power. So the author Robert Greene in this chapter uses a couple examples of historic figures who have done this successfully. The first that he uses is Julius Caesar. So Julius Caesar was the Roman emperor in the time when Rome's power, I guess from what I understand, was being consolidated, and he had to basically, he was part of what's called a triumvirate, which was three, not kings, but they were like called consuls at the time. They were basically emperors or kings. But he basically was the winner of the civil war between those three parties and became the emperor of Rome and was, super famous and powerful and all that stuff. So what Julius Caesar did is, in order to win that war between the three consuls, he had to get the allegiance of tons of people. I'm talking, hundreds of thousands of people in his army, and then millions throughout Rome's empire, in order to actually win out against Pompey, who was rich beyond any fathoming. From what I understand, he had something like $250 billion in current currency, and the next richest person in Rome had like $1 billion. So just a crazy disparity in wealth. So the way that Julius Caesar overcame that, which really is indicative of the amount of power he was able to amass, is that he was able to win people's allegiance and hold their attention because he was a fantastic showman. And so what he would do is, like, for example, when he was crossing the Rubicon River, which he was marching on Rome, even though he was a Roman consul, he was a leader, he was declared an enemy of the state, and he had to actually march on Rome to take it back and become the supreme emperor, commander, or whatever. So when he did that, there was this one river that he had to cross. Making sure I'm not hit by a car here. And so when he was inciting his generals to want to actually do it, to actually want to cross the river and go to war on Rome, on their home city, he really had to get a lot of buy-in. So in order to do it, he just played a massive showman. And Julius Caesar was known for doing this a lot. He would, in battle, he would be in the center of the battle, like a godlike figure of power. And he would always be seen just like outdo, he would always be showing up his soldiers and showing them, like, really leading from the front and just showing that he was all around a fantastic leader. So what he was doing is he was getting their buy-in by making himself into a larger than life figure by constantly reinventing himself. First he's a general, now he's a politician, now he's the emperor, now he's, the statesman. So he kept going in his evolution in order to keep people captivated and just continually interested in what he was doing. And so that's how he wound up rallying his generals, crossing the river, and then actually going into Rome and eventually taking over Rome. A couple months later, he was the emperor and Pompey was killed. So that's the first example. The second example that the author gives is that of George Sand, and that's actually a pseudonym for a female writer in early France, I think like the 1700s. And so this lady took on the pseudonym of George Sand and really recreated herself basically as a male writer in order to follow her dream of being a writer. She always wanted to write, and she wanted to make her way about through life in a time when all women's options were basically either to marry a rich dude or to become a prostitute. Those were basically their only options for making any money for themselves, or making a living, or making their own way in life. So this chick basically said, screw that, I'm going to make my own way in life, I'm going to reinvent myself. So she decided to reinvent herself as a man. So by doing that, she actually basically broke the rules of society to such an extent that they really didn't apply to her anymore. Not only would she just kind of do whatever she wanted, she would have, affairs with the greatest writers of the time, but she would pursue them. And then when it was time for them to end, she would break up with them, not the other way around. And this was just very unusual for a woman to do. But what she was able to do is really create a lot of publicity for her books, and she was actually able to create a really good living for herself and make herself into a very influential writer, literally by just transforming herself and reinventing herself into a man. a super relevant, I think, present day example of this is a guy by the name of Julien Blanc. On, I think, Instagram and YouTube and pretty much all social media, his handle is Julien himself. And I would highly recommend following Julien because he puts out some amazing self-help content. But what Julien has done is, over time, he has kept people really interested in what he's doing by constantly pushing the boundaries on what is acceptable to do and breaking the rules on what people think you're allowed to say or what they think you're allowed to do or get away with. That's something he's really good at, is doing crazy things and getting away with them and having people say, you know, it's just Julien, it's just how he is. And so a little bit of his backstory, just to give you context and to show you why he's a good example of someone who recreates themselves, is he started out as just a boy in Switzerland, and he wound up dropping. He was in college and he was super dissatisfied, and he found what's known as the underground pickup artist community. And so he basically dropped everything in Switzerland and moved to LA and slept on this guy's couch who he found on Craigslist, and basically just lived in this cockroach infested house, and basically got this job in this dating company and worked his way up from the bottom to become one of the most well-known dating coaches in the world. And then that actually wound up getting flipped on its head to where he put out some videos that were really controversial, and he wound up becoming dubbed by, I think it was not Time Magazine, but it might have been on the Time Magazine website. He was called the world's most hated man. He was actually banned from 3 countries. I believe it was Canada, Australia, and potentially China. I think I might be wrong on that, but he was banned from a couple countries as far as couldn't travel to them. People in his company were worried he was going to get arrested and held captive abroad. So really just a very trying time for him. But what he wound up doing is using that trial to transform himself into transitioning from a success with women or dating coach into a life coach and a trauma release coach. So really what he focuses on now is owning your past and integrating it into who you are, and then transcending it and not having it limit you. And this dude will do the craziest stuff. He'll wear like a poncho on stage. He does a ton of public speaking. So he'll regularly speak to hundreds of people at a time, and he'll pack out an event. He did this event in a church in, I think it was Frankfurt, Germany, and he had a church packed with like 3,000 people, and he's up on the pulpit being all ridiculous. But the reason I say he's being all ridiculous is because he's very extra in the way he intones his voice is very extreme, and he always has these crazy expressions with his hands, and he's very expressive in everything he does. And so what he's doing is, by being so expressive and being such a dynamic figure, he's keeping people locked in on what he's doing. People are very, very interested in what Julien Blanc is doing once they kind of get in that ecosystem, because it's just so engaging and you never know what's going to come next. So you always want to stay watching. And by doing that both in his speaking style and in the bigger picture of his life, he's really been able to build basically a cult following. And I mean, this dude, not only does he have a lot of followers per se, he actually doesn't even have that many. He has maybe like 80,000 on Instagram, but which is a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, not that many. But what he has is a true and a cult following. I mean, he will launch a digital product and he'll sell a couple million in the first couple months of that digital product. So just the amount of power he's able to derive out of his public persona is very massive. He's able to sell out his live in-person events. So it's just really a great example of the amount of power that you can accumulate if you're not afraid to reinvent yourself. And that's what a lot of this comes down to is, are you afraid to be out of the ordinary? Or are you okay with being out of the ordinary? And are you okay with the tension that being out of the ordinary creates at first? Actually, that's not true. It kind of never goes away. Can you sit with tension? Are you okay with the tension that it creates when, let's say, your grandmother, who doesn't really understand what you're trying to do when you're reinventing yourself, are you okay with her judgment, her saying, when are you going to get married and settle down? Are you okay with saying, Grandma, I love you, but I'm not planning on doing that. I have different plans for my life. Or maybe you do, no judgment either way. But if you're going to reinvent yourself in a way that's truly impactful and leads you to a place of real influence and real power, which why else would you even be watching this video if you weren't interested in accumulating power for yourself in order to do good with it, hopefully. If you're interested in that, it's going to require breaking a few emotional eggs, so to speak. There are people whose feelings are going to be hurt by the fact that you're doing something different, because what it's going to do is it's going to implicitly make a statement about them. See, that's the funny thing about human beings is we perceive everything in a relative manner. So everything is relative. You're not rich unless you're richer than the people around you. Even though we're rich by the standards of, say, like the 1600s, you know, we probably have access to more wealth and capital than a king or queen even would in the 1600s. I mean, I have more followers than, you know, Julius Caesar did, right? On Instagram. He didn't have any followers on Instagram. So the amount to which our level of, or our standard of living has grown is crazy, but we see it as no big deal because we're doing everything relatively. So what that causes is, if someone else sees you doing something, because we judge things on a relative basis, if they aren't doing something extreme as well, they have no choice but to either say, okay, that shines a light on my deficiency and I'm not taking action, and I probably really should be if I'm being honest with myself, but I'm not. Or they can say, oh, that's weird. I don't want to admit that that's actually awesome that that person is following their dreams and actually recreating themselves. I'm going to use my, you know, this excuse of it being weird or out of the ordinary or unacceptable to mask the fact that I'm actually scared of taking action. I'm afraid of the failure. So I'm going to shit on the person who's actually going for it. Gary Vee has a lot of strong opinions on this, and I agree with pretty much all of them. In case you couldn't tell, I love Gary Vee. Follow him as well. He's phenomenal. But that's really it. Recreating yourself is about not being afraid of what other people are going to say about you, because if people are saying things about you, they're actually paying attention to you, which means you're accumulating power already. If you remember, Law 6, court attention at all costs, something that I lead off that video with is, if you haven't seen it, go watch it again. We'll try to, maybe we can do a little link thing, maybe we can figure that out. But if you haven't seen it, the way I lead it off is with a quote from the book, which is that it's better to be hated and ridiculed than to be ignored. I'll say it again. It's better to be hated and ridiculed than to be ignored. Being ignored gives you no leverage. At least being hated, people know who you are. So keep that in mind. Recreate yourself this week. That is your action item. Do something to recreate yourself. Do something a little out of the ordinary that makes you just pop a little bit in the eyes of the people around you. That, you know, not necessarily in the needy way. You know, it's not like about needing attention, but see if you can captivate people's attention a little bit. It's a very useful thing to be able to do. Try it out. If you've not, also follow me on Instagram at TampaBrad. Hit the subscribe button, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell so you get notified when we're dropping all these sick vids. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. We're about to go here in a Starbucks and get some tea. I'll see ya. Peace.